All right. Good morning, everyone. This is the second installment of our series of webinar programs, Three Strikes and You're Out. Some of you may have attended the last one that we did 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, we talked about all of the steps that you try to take in order to bring in the right hires, doing interviewing in a legal and effective manner. We're 3 weeks in, and we realize that we've got some bad eggs. I want to talk about what happens when good employees turn bad. We know, and if anybody, if you've been in business for any period of time, I'm sure you've had a hire that you've made where you thought this person was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and he or she just didn't turn out to be that person. So what do you do then to manage that process and get that person out the door in a dignified manner, in a manner that allows you to keep operating the business in an appropriate way, and perhaps most importantly, avoid legal trouble if you can. Again, for those of you that saw me last time, you know that I'm the Vice President and General Counsel at a company called North Coast Container. Prior to that, I worked in private practice as an attorney for 18 years, and the focus of my practice was on employment and labor-related matters. So I want to take you through some of the practical steps that you can take to try to keep yourself legal and, again, start working with those employees that aren't pulling their weight and make sure we move in the right direction with them. All right, so let's see if I can make this go. Hopefully you're seeing the... there we go. All right. Good. Hopefully by now you're seeing my my slides come up. I want to talk about, again, when good employees turn bad. I think this is an important step to take. Think about this. Almost all of your employees, and maybe every single one of your employees, probably is what you would call at will. And for those of you who know that topic, you'll know what I'm talking about, but let me explain just in case there are people on the line that don't know. At will is basically the standard by which all employees are judged in Ohio unless you have a contract or you're a member of a union. What it means is, and I'm an at-will employee, for example, with my company, it means that I can be fired at will and I can quit at will for any reason or no reason, with notice, without notice, and it sounds great. It sounds like you can just wake up one day and decide, I don't like that employee, or he's a Steelers fan and I'm a Browns fan and I'm going to let him go. The reality of that situation is, even though we say that at will is the standard in Ohio, most judges, most juries, the Unemployment Bureau, the EEOC, and anybody else that you can think of who might take a look at what you're doing is going to look for some sort of fairness in the way that you operate. And I would like to think that every employer, or most employers that I know anyways, like to operate from a point of fairness. And part of the fairness equation is, if somebody is not doing their job well, go through a process to make sure that you know that they're not the right fit. First thing to do, ask questions first. I've seen too many employers, including my own, take too many opportunities to conclude the worst about their employees before they go out and find the truth. You know, I think it's a better process if you ask those questions first. Don't prejudge a situation. Get to the bottom of it. If you have somebody who's a poor work performer or somebody who is engaging in bad behavior, I always think it's good to create a paper trail. And I know that's that's something you probably hear from lawyers all the time. Lawyers love paper. We love paper because we love evidence. And we know that if at the end of the day somebody's going to come knocking on our door, whether it's a lawyer or a investigator from the EEOC or even the Unemployment Bureau, they're going to want to understand how we got from A to B. How is it that this person that you hired 10 years ago and had great reviews for 9 years all of a sudden turned bad? It's better if you have a paper trail. It's something that people find much more trustworthy than just the spoken word. If you're going to have an investigation, if you're investigating, again, work performance issues, attendance issues, harassments, again, workplace misconduct, it's always good to keep, and I stress the word contemporaneous notes here. Very important for you to keep track of what is going on and write those notes down as they happen. If you wait a day or a week or a month to write those notes, somebody, a lawyer like me, is going to be able to poke holes in that and say, okay, you wrote this 30 days after it happened. Tell me what happened in those intervening days. Who did you talk to? Did you talk to the plant manager? Did you talk to the owner? Did you talk to the lawyer? All of those people had some influence on what you ultimately decided to write down. And if you're anything like me, you don't even know what you had for breakfast yesterday. So if you wait 30 days to write that, it's more likely that it's not going to be an accurate depiction. It's going to be clouded by people's view of the facts, and it's going to start to impact those on the outside who would look at those notes and say, you know what, I just don't trust those. They've been sitting for way too long. There was too much of an opportunity to have 20/20 hindsight on this one. So record all of the facts, the who, the what, the when, the where. I love this also. If you're going through an investigation and an employee is not doing his job right, or he does, again, something wrong, sticks his foot in his mouth with another employee, is engaged in some bad behavior, if that employee makes some sort of admission that they screwed up, write that down. That's always good to have, because later on, when they hire a lawyer after they've been terminated, they may try to recreate history and rewrite it in a way that isn't true. I like to have those admissions on file, if you will, before we get into a situation where the lawyer is getting them to backpedal away from that story. And if you have particular words that they say, put quotes around it. Employee said, I screwed up big time. Put quotes around that. Date your notes, put that in there. You don't have to have him sign off on an admission. You don't have to beat him with a rubber hose to get the admission out of him. It's good enough for me to get that down in writing shortly after it happens. However that works for you. You can send yourself an email to the file so that you have it. You can jot it down on a notepad. Make sure you date it, though, and put it in as much detail as you can so that we have it for later. Again, date and author it. Throw away drafts. This always makes me nervous when I see different versions of disciplinary memos. And so it comes out the first time around, we're going to give him a written warning. And then the next draft is that he's going to be suspended for 1 day, and ultimately he gets a 3-day suspension. Well, what influenced you over that period of time? Was it talking to the plant manager again? Was it the owner? Was it the lawyer? How is it that you got from A to B on this? And maybe there's a perfectly legitimate explanation for it. I just don't want to get into those. There's no reason for you to keep drafts. And if you keep your notes on a computer system, don't keep multiple versions of them. Just save over the one that you have. Because at the end of the day, if we do get into litigation, somebody wants to look at what's on your computer, they're going to be able to pull up multiple drafts, multiple versions, and get a better sense of how you got from A to B. This is critical. Be professional in all of the things you write. You can't imagine how many times that I've seen people that I know are professional write things that are just plain stupid. And they will do it typically in an email format, and I know you know what this looks like, because if you're like me, you write your emails much more casually than you would write a letter or a memo or some other more official-looking document. Very, very important that you write with a greater audience in mind. If you are dealing with a very sticky situation, and you know somewhere down the line this person is going to come back at me for either unemployment benefits or some sort of lawsuit or some sort of claim of discrimination or some sort of unfair other behavior that they're going to allege, you know, or you should know, that your notes and your investigation and all the paper around this is going to be looked at by somebody else. You don't want to have something up there that becomes Exhibit A in a lawsuit. Something that is said in the heat of the moment where you're angry about something. You use unfortunate word choices, or you cast it in a way that, you know, you're going to have to explain in front of the jury. That's not something you ever want to get into. So be very careful with that. And I've been in many situations where I've had an executive team, for example, deciding the fate of a particular employee. People are in different locations. Maybe I'm in the car one day, maybe I'm on vacation. So you start to have this email chain where you're talking about what a bum this guy is, and and you're using, again, unfortunate word choices like that. The best thing to do in that situation, pick up the phone, all right? Don't create an email chain of a bunch of frustrated comments that, again, we're going to have to try to explain later on to the jury to say, well, it wasn't really personal. It was really about the poor job that he was doing. You're not going to be able to win that, or it's going to be harder to win that if you have a bunch of really inappropriate chatter going back and forth, particularly on email. And if discipline is warranted, you're going to want to document when it was given as well as any marching orders going forward. Again, it's all about fairness when you're talking about discipline and ultimately termination. If we get into a situation, again, where we have to defend a claim for unemployment or a charge of discrimination or a lawsuit, no one in that situation who's going to be looking at this from the outside is going to be impressed by the fact that you can say, well, he was an at-will employee and I just decided to get rid of him one day. People very naturally, and I think you and I and everybody that's on this call, if we were in that situation and we were the one being terminated, we would look for some sort of element of fairness. How is it that I failed? How did I get from A to B in your system? And somebody that you thought was good enough to hire and pay a reasonable wage, all of a sudden I failed. And if I can't see the element of fairness in what you've done, it's much more likely I'm going to start connecting dots. And those dots may or may not be fair enough to connect, but people in a very natural way will start to do that. They'll start to say, you know what, I think I was doing a great job. I had a great evaluation back in December. I got a raise. I got a bonus. And then come April, I'm told that, you know, I'm on my way out the door. What happened in there? I know it wasn't my work performance, so it must be something else. Ah, I know what it is. It's my age. It's my gender. It's my race. It's my religion. Think of whatever factor you want to think about. And it's very easy, and I would even argue natural for people to have that sort of defensive mechanism. It's almost like when, you know, your girlfriend breaks up with you. You don't want to believe it was you. You want to believe it was her. A work relationship is probably the biggest relationship that you have. Think about your job. Think about how your employees view their jobs. You don't hardly do anything more during the day than work. It's a very big part of who you are, and if I tell you you're no good at it and I'm letting you go, it's very natural to be defensive and try to look for excuses. The more that you do to document the path on the way out the door, the more likely it is you can eliminate those excuses. All right, let me tell you about a termination checklist. These are the types of questions that I used to ask my clients all the time whenever they would call me with a sticky situation where they wanted to let somebody go and they wanted to know what their risks were going forward. These are the types of questions I would ask them to think about. And this is, again, what I do with my company now. Number one, again, is the termination justified? Again, wait, but he's at will. Who cares? It doesn't need to be justified. In the real world, it does need to be justified. And the question I will ask is, are the reasons clearly identified? Do they make sense? Can you articulate to me why it is this person is being let go? And I might ask it just as broadly as this. Tell me exactly why this is happening. Or one of the favorite questions I used to get from lawyers on the other side of these cases. What was the straw that broke the camel's back? Again, you've got a 15-year employee. Nothing but a history of B plus evaluations, nothing but raises and bonuses, and all of a sudden they're on the way out the door. What changed? What was the straw that broke the camel's back here? And that's a question that you will often be asked in these situations. Again, whether it's through unemployment or through a lawsuit or some other process, someone is going to ask that question, and you need to be able to answer that and be convincing in that. And so if the straw that broke the camel's back happened 6 months prior to the termination, how is that going to look? It's going to look like it was a made-up reason. It doesn't look like it's the real reason, so something else must have happened in there. If that happened 6 months ago, why'd you wait 6 months to fire? So what are those reasons? Do they make sense? Obviously, ask the question, are they lawful and non-discriminatory? I need to know that other employees that have committed similar infractions have been treated similarly. If you have 5 employees that have done the same thing, and 4 of them were written up and only 1 is terminated, I need to understand why this one situation is different than the others. And what I don't want to see is that the 4 employees that got the written write-up happen to be white, and the one that got terminated happened to be African American. That's obviously going to be a big line in the sand that somebody's going to look at, and you're going to have some explaining to do on that. Again, are they documented? It's nice to be able to tell the story to unemployment and other places. It's a lot easier and much more convincing if you've got some paper to back you up. Second question I often like to ask is, should the employee be surprised by the company's decision? Or will the employee be surprised by the decision? That's a big one to me, because if it's a work-related issue, if it's a work performance issue, I'd like to think that that employee has had some level of warning. And again, we're looking for fairness here. If that employee is going to be stunned and think that for the last 10 years he's been doing a great job, I'm going to start to think that that employee is going to be a risk for you, because that employee is going to look for some reasoning. They're going to look to try to connect dots again. So if the employee is going to be shocked by this, I've got some issues with that. Now, that isn't always the case, obviously. If you catch an employee doing inappropriate things with your email, for example, and they don't know that you've been watching the email, and you realize they've been on porn websites for the last 3 months, I'll bet you they'll be shocked, and that's okay. That's an all right situation for the employee to be stunned. But if it's a more garden variety work performance, attendance type issue, most people would expect to have some notice. And again, so they're looking for warnings. Did they have a chance to correct the problem? Again, this is something particularly the unemployment folks look for. Was there any opportunity to go through a probationary period? Sometimes we call them PIPs, performance improvement plans. Did they have some window of opportunity to try to show you they could do the job? And was there any fair warning? What happens if I don't improve? I usually like to write my disciplinary memos to say, if you don't do better in the future, we will take further disciplinary action up to and including termination of employment. I don't want to lock myself into 5 different steps to termination. I'm going to call it as I see it as I go forward, but I need to give you some warning that you're in trouble. And sometimes people are a little passive about this, and they'll say, well, just do better. If I walk out of that room and I don't know that the next step is potentially a step out the door, I might not have had fair warning in that situation. And at least that's what I'm going to argue when I'm going to somebody on the outside to say that my employer did something wrong to me. Third thing to think about when you're looking to terminate an employee, are there any loose ends that need to be tied up? For example, you may have a non-compete or a confidentiality agreement with your employee. If you have a non-compete, you want to remind them about that non-compete on the way out the door. If they have a confidentiality agreement or a non-solicitation agreement, again, remind them of that and make sure that you get your property back, all right? Whether that's keys, phones, files, flash drives. You might actually want to have your IT person, if you have one, take a look at what's going on the computer before you let that person go. You might want to look to see, for example, especially if somebody they know they've been in hot water, look to see, have they been downloading stuff to a personal email account? Have they been downloading stuff to a flash drive? You're going to want to ask questions about that during that termination interview, because that might be the last time you get to see that person before they lawyer up. And so in a situation like that, you want to be able to say, look, I noticed on 5 different occasions in the last month, you sent X, Y, and Z files to a Yahoo account, which appears to be your personal account. You're going to want to ask where that is, and you're going to want to demand that you get that information back. That's your company property. You have a right to keep that, frankly, whether or not they have a confidentiality clause or not. There is that person's property, and there's your property. Any of your files, your handbooks, your sales files, your financials, God forbid, any of that type of information, if they're holding on to that, you have a right to ask for that back. Last paychecks. Make sure that you square up the bill here. This is a place where if you don't do it correctly and you unnecessarily irritate this person, you're going to drive them into the arms of a lawyer. So make sure that you understand exactly, how far you're going to pay that paycheck out. Is it going to be on the day of termination? Is it going to be the end of the week? Do they have accrued vacation that you're going to want to pay out, or some other form of PTO time that under your normal policy and procedure you pay out? If you're going to do that, make sure you understand exactly what those numbers are. Do they owe you anything? Do they have a personal loan, for example, with the company that needs to be squared up on the way out the door? Do you have a policy, for example, that says if you don't return my computer or keys or garage door opener, I can deduct that from your last paycheck? Make sure you understand exactly what it is that you are paying that person. You don't have to pay it to them on their last day of employment. I should be careful when I say that. If you have any employees in California, California law requires that all bills be squared up on the day of termination. Ohio's not like that. Ohio says paid in the normal payroll course. So if you fire this person on June 2nd and your normal payroll check is June 15th, you can pay them then. Make sure you understand what you're doing with their health care also. If you are large enough to have a COBRA obligation, meaning you have more than 20 employees, you're going to end up sending COBRA paperwork home. If you're under 20, there's an Ohio law that deals with that also. So make sure you understand, does the health care cut off on the day of termination, or does it end at the end of the month of coverage? You'll want to talk to your provider to make sure you understand that these will be very natural questions that somebody will want to ask. Any accrued benefits that this person has. Again, make sure you understand, is there a rollover of 401k money? Do they have any vested pension benefits, and so on? This is important. How will you break the news to the employee? I've had people that have wanted to do this by phone because they don't want them in the building. I generally find that to be a little cold. And I do think that the way you handle a termination often dictates whether that person goes to see a lawyer. Try to do it in a dignified manner, okay? Who's going to be in attendance? If there's somebody that's a particular point of friction with this employee, my best advice is think twice about putting that person in the room with them. This is not a time to get in an argument or a fight about the facts. You don't have to read out a full indictment. It's okay to summarize the reason why it is that the person's being let go. If they want to argue about points of fact, you can put your hand up and say, we're past that point. I'm not here to debate it. I'm just here to provide the information to you and get you on your way to your next position. Decide if you want to have a witness in the room with you. Again, depending on how contentious it might be, there are times when that doesn't make sense. I don't think you want to set it up like a firing squad and have him he or she walk into a room with 10 people, but sometimes having one other person with you is not a bad idea. Decide whether you want to do it in verbal or written format. My general view of that is verbal is better, and that may sound a little contradictory to what I told you before. My problem with doing something in writing to the employee is it's almost impossible to capture all of your thoughts in that written format, and somebody will later on take that, a lawyer will say, this is what you gave them, this is all that the reasons were, right? You're sort of penned into the four corners of that document. You don't owe them something in writing. You can summarize it verbally, and I think that's usually a better way. In this day and age, we know we have to think about security concerns. And I've had situations where we've let people go, clients of mine have let people go, and you make a decision that you want to have a gentle security presence in the building. For example, don't be afraid to call a local police department and see if you can get an off-duty cop to come sit in your lobby. Don't have to be dressed as a cop, obviously, but just sitting out there reading a magazine in case something happens. My best advice here is call the police department if you have one of those situations. Believe me, they all are well versed in this. This is 2014. This is what we have to do. And if you have any concerns, I always say, when in doubt, take that precaution. You don't want to have to be second guessed later on after something terrible happens. The other thing to think about when you're talking about security concerns is how you're going to get the person out of the building. My view always is don't make them do a walk of shame through the office and go grab a box and start taking pictures off the wall in front of their coworkers and their colleagues. That's demeaning, it's demoralizing, it's potentially inflammatory. The better thing to do is give them an option and say, look, I don't want you to have to do this right now. We can make arrangements to send the stuff home, or we can have you come back later on after hours to do it. You tell me how you want to do it. And that, to me, also helps sort of grease the skids and get you in a situation where you're not as antagonistic as it might be. How should you handle the aftermath of the decision? You got to decide what effect is this going to have on employee morale. Generally speaking, we don't like to communicate too much about what happened to other employees, right? You don't air out all your dirty laundry for your employees. I think you need to think about that and decide what's the best way to inform them. Usually we send emails out that at least inform folks that so-and-so has decided to move on. We wish them the best of luck with their future endeavors and so on. If somebody wants to poke and prod around about that, I usually tell them, look, I don't share your personal information with other employees, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to share Joe's information with you. What to do about references? Something else to think about. This person is obviously going to go look for another job. My best advice to you there is, and you probably already do this, name, rank, and serial number is usually the thing that we do for all of these references. So if somebody calls and asks for a reference, I will provide dates of employment. I will provide last job title and last rate of pay. All right, very quickly, I want to show you one other piece, because I know we're going to run short on time here. And I should say this, I should have said this at the beginning. If you do have questions, please go ahead. Did they type them in, Bridget? Yes. Yeah, you can type in a question. It will appear on my screen. If you have a question that you'd rather not share with the group, you can do that afterwards also, and I can communicate with you afterwards. So don't be afraid to ask questions. I've been through this a lot, unfortunately, and I can hopefully provide you some advice that might be useful if you're going through one of these. Last thing I wanted to talk about, but I know we only have about 5 minutes, interplay between evaluations and discipline. I want to show you how important it is to be consistent in the way that you handle folks. This is a real-life case. Company hires an accountant at the age of 62. They let him go 10 months later. He was hired in a temporary capacity. The reasons given to him, well, the temp assignment had run out. We don't have any other work for you. And on top of it, your work performance wasn't really where it needed to be, so we're going to cut you loose. Sounds pretty simple. Sounds like a pretty clean-cut case. He'd only been there 10 months after all. But court allows an age discrimination to go forward. You say, age discrimination? Come on, I hired this guy when he was 62. I let him go when he was 62 and 10 months. Where is the age discrimination? How is it possible that I'm an age discriminator if I hired the guy? It's not that he grew old in the position. Heck, he was already 62 when I hired him. Well, the court looked at some inconsistencies here, and they said, yeah, we hear you when you say that, but the story that you gave this guy when you let him go, it doesn't match up to the facts. You say that he was a temp employee, but that was a shock to him because when you look at the handbook, they had a whole different definition of what a temp employee was, and he doesn't seem to match that. You say that the workflow had dried up, but we see lots of other accountants in that group working, and it looks like they just happen to absorb his work, so that looks inconsistent to us. And you say that he was a poor work performer, but when we stack him up against other of his peers, I don't see that. He looks like he's doing just about as well as anybody else. So because of all of these inconsistencies in your story, you've given us a story. You've stated your case when you terminated him, but it just doesn't match up to the facts. And as a result, we're going to kick this over to the jury to decide if you're telling the truth. So once you do things that are considered to be inconsistent, it's possible that a judge or a jury is going to think that you're lying. And so the jury is going to have to ask whether that employer is telling the truth or whether age was a motivating factor. Or, and this was another fact in the case, here's a possible explanation, We know the employee's wife had some significant health problems. Maybe that's the reason why they let this guy go, because they didn't want to have all of these costs on their health care plan. These are big challenges that you create for yourself if you don't think it through before you terminate somebody. You want to take a problem when you're looking at terminating somebody, turn it around, poke it around with other people in your office, or talk to a friend or a lawyer or somebody and say, does this make sense? Have somebody play devil's advocate with you to make sure that you're thinking of all the different ways this person might react to that situation. As you can see, that was a very recent case. I think we are out of time. I appreciate everybody who attended today. I hope this was helpful for everybody. And again, if you have any questions that I can answer even offline, we're going to look to see if there's any questions. There is one there. Let's see here. Okay. Question was asked, would you ever provide severance pay on a termination for cause? And if so, for what period of time? Short answer is yes. I can think of situations where you're terminating somebody for cause, but you recognize that that person is a potential litigation risk to you. So you look at it and you say, I know this person has to go, but I know that it's a little bit muddy. It's a little bit murky because they may fall into a particular protected class. Perhaps they're African American. Perhaps they've made some claims of harassment or something in the past. Maybe they made a claim about safety violations, and you look at it and you say, this is enough of a risk that I'm going to pay this person to go out the door. You would pay that person only in exchange for a release of claims. I don't pay severance out unless I'm getting a release, and if you ever need help with that, let me know. But I would like to say, look, we want to do this in an amicable fashion. I want to provide you with a safety net to your next position, and the only thing I'm asking in return is that we can walk away amicably, professionally. I can close the books on you, you can close the books on me. So yes, I can certainly foresee situations where, and the way you would present that, by the way, is you would say, look, here's our situation. We are going to terminate you for cause, and here's the reasons why. But I'm going to give you an option. I'm going to allow you to leave with some dignity. I will accept a resignation from you, and in exchange for your resignation, I'll pay you a severance of X amount. Let's talk about X amount then. And if you don't accept my offer, I will terminate you for cause. That puts the onus on them to really think about it, because most people don't want to have a termination for cause on their record. What period of time do you pay? There's a lot of different thought process on this. Sometimes it depends on how long that person has been there. I've heard people say 1 week for 1 year of service up to some cap. My general thinking is if you're not going to at least offer 30 days, you're probably not going to get a release in return. Folks might look at that as sort of a slap in the face. It's like leaving a cheap tip. If you're going to leave a cheap tip, don't leave a tip at all. But the general view is anywhere between 30 and 90 days. That's enough money that you're putting that in a case and you're saying it's like deal or no deal. This is what's in this case. It's a reasonable amount of money. It's going to give you some safety net going forward. But if you don't take it, that case goes away, and you can go try to open another case either through a lawsuit or through unemployment or some other venue, and you may end up with something that's less than that. So that's the kind of calculus that you typically go through. But yes, I can see situations where you would pay somebody that you're terminating for cause, or at least give them an opportunity to go out with dignity. I think there might be another question there too. Is it okay to require that they sign the acknowledgement? Is there any more at the beginning of that? Oh, here. Okay. Okay. Is it important to have employees sign disciplinary write-ups that they got the write-up? This is something that I work in a union shop, for example. We get into fights about this all the time. Does the employee need to sign it in order to show that they got it? I don't think there's real magic in this, and I will tell you that I've arbitrated enough of these cases over time to know that arbitrators, judges, juries, they're not impressed by having that employee signature on the bottom of the page. Oftentimes that gets into, you get into a lot of fights about it because the employee says, yeah, you're saying that I'm just acknowledging that I received it, but I feel like I'm acknowledging the truth of it, and I don't believe in all of this nonsense, and you get into fights about it. You don't need that person's autograph on it in order to prove that they got it. It's enough that you put your own signature on there that says this was provided to the employee at 9:37 on June 5th, 2014. That will suffice to just about anybody in the world to show that they received it. So I don't think there's any magic in getting the employee's signature on that. I do think there is magic, however, in making sure that you document it with somebody else, somebody that's not going to have a problem signing it. Again, you don't need to beat a signature out of them with a rubber hose. Any other questions on that one? Okay, if there aren't any other questions, we will sign off. But again, if you have any others, I know that this webinar will be posted on the BBB website. And again, don't be afraid to ask questions. I hope this was helpful.
Okay, again, I want to thank Jim for joining us today and giving us his time and his expertise. And I'm going to go ahead and send you all an invitation to our group site website where you guys can not only view this one and the past webinars, but you'll also be able to take a look at the slides that we use for this, and you can go ahead and post any questions, and we'll see if our presenters are going to be gracious enough to answer those for us. So
we'll be gracious.
Very good. Well, thank you very much again for joining us, and also if you have any other suggestions, feel free to send them to me at bridget@cleveland.bbb.org.